Today felt like one of those days when history seems to whisper directly in your ear. There's an urgency that presses down on the soul, a moment where a leader, stripped of the comfort of indecision, must act with absolute clarity and resolve. As I sit here in my study, reflecting on the events of this day, I can't help but feel the enormity of the decision that I faced. The weight of it is palpable. My decisions today will affect not just the future of this administration, but perhaps the course of history itself. It started with the morning briefing in the Oval Office. The reports had been arriving since the early hours of the morning. McGeorge Bundy, my national security advisor, and Robert McNamara, my Secretary of Defense, were already present, standing in front of a large desk, their faces grim with the weight of what they were about to tell me. It wasn't just another routine briefing. It was a matter of national and international security. "We've been monitoring the Cuban situation closely," McGeorge said, his usual calm demeanor now tinged with an edge of concern. "The Soviet Union is intensifying its involvement. Intelligence indicates that they may be positioning nuclear missiles in Cuba." The very words caught me off guard. Cuba, less than 90 miles from our shores, a communist ally, and now, it seemed, a strategic missile base for the Soviets. It felt like something out of a nightmare, but it was real. The immediate realization dawned on me. The stakes had just become higher than I ever could have anticipated. This wasn't just a Cold War flashpoint. This was an existential threat to the United States, and I had to confront it head-on. I looked at McNamara, whose expression was as steely as ever, despite the gravity of the news. "Mr. President, if they follow through on this, we could have Soviet missiles capable of reaching the southeastern United States, possibly even Washington, D.C., in a matter of weeks," McNamara said, his voice carrying a certain finality that made it clear this was not a situation that could be ignored. I could feel the room closing in around me. The tension was thick, and every second that passed made the world feel a little smaller. I had made decisions before, important ones, but this felt different. This was a matter of life and death, a matter of survival for millions of people, and I would be held accountable for whatever course of action I chose. "Do we have any diplomatic options?" I asked, trying to steady myself. I knew the answer, but I had to hear it aloud. Dean Rusk, my Secretary of State, had joined the meeting by now, and his face was etched with the same sense of gravity. "We've already tried to communicate with the Soviets through back channels, but their response has been cold, dismissive even. They know they are gambling with fire, but they are playing for keeps." His words hit hard. The Soviets had crossed a line, and we couldn't afford to back down. But at the same time, I knew that we had to handle this carefully. Any misstep could lead to a war that could consume the world. The thought of the potential fallout, the sheer devastation of a nuclear conflict, loomed large in my mind. "We're left with very few options," McGeorge said. "We can either strike now, or we can engage in a full blockade, which will signal our resolve without immediately escalating to military conflict." A blockade. I had heard the term before, but hearing it now, in the context of the Cuban crisis, it felt like an ultimatum. A choice that would bind us into a path from which there would be no easy retreat. "How soon can we implement a naval blockade?" I asked. My voice was steady, but inside, I was wrestling with the implications of my decision. The eyes of the world were upon us, and whatever I decided would send a message to both our allies and our enemies. McNamara looked over his notes. "We're ready. The ships can be deployed within a matter of days." "Then let's do it," I said, my decision firming up as the words left my lips. "We'll implement a naval blockade to prevent any further Soviet shipments to Cuba, and we'll demand that the Soviets remove any missiles already stationed there." The decision hung in the air for a long moment. I could feel the magnitude of it settling in. It was a gamble, an enormous gamble, but it was one I had to take. There was no room for hesitation. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings, communications, and preparations. I spoke with members of Congress, briefing them on the situation, though the gravity of the news made it clear that there were few words to offer beyond what had already been said. This wasn't about politics anymore. This was about the survival of the nation. In the late afternoon, I had a private conversation with Bobby, my brother and Attorney General. I had to be sure that we were unified in our approach. He, as always, was direct and sharp in his analysis. "Jack, you know we can't let this go unchecked," Bobby said. "But we also need to be ready for fallout, the potential consequences. The Soviets are known for backing down easily." I could feel the weight of his words. Bobby had always been my closest confidant, and his insight was invaluable. He wasn't just my brother, he was my most trusted advisor. And in moments like these, his counsel was a steadying force. "I know, Bobby, but I can't let them push us around," I replied. "We have to make a stand. For our country. For our future." Later that evening, as the house quieted, and I sat down for dinner with Jackie and the children, the quiet contrast between the weight of the day and the comfort of family was stark. Jackie could tell that something was troubling me, though I hadn't spoken much of the decision I had just made. "How was today, Jack?" she asked softly, her eyes searching mine. "It was a long day," I said, forcing a smile. "A decision had to be made, and I've made it. We'll have to wait and see what happens next." She nodded, understanding. She always understood. Jackie had seen me through so many battles, both public and private. But tonight, there was a quiet sadness in her eyes. She knew, as I did, that the world was at a precipice, and it was my hand that would determine which direction we would fall. As I drifted off to sleep later that night, I reflected on the decision I had made. The world had shifted beneath my feet, and tomorrow we would wake up to a new reality. The weight of the responsibility that came with leadership was profound, and I felt it keenly tonight. But I also understood, in that quiet moment, that leadership is not defined by the weight of the burden you carry, is defined by the courage you summon to bear it. Tomorrow, we face a new day, and with it, a new chapter in the long story of our nation. John F. Kennedy.